Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. The Killer Women vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to the Killer Women podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with over 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Alessandra Torre. Alessandra is an award-winning New York Times bestselling author of more than 20 novels. She has been featured in such publications as Elle and Elle UK, as well as guest blogged for the Huffington Post and RT Book Reviews. She's also the bedroom blogger for Cosmopolitan.com. In addition to writing, Alessandra is the creator of the Alessandra Torre Inc., a website, community, and online school for aspiring authors. Her annual conference is Inkers Con and is available online or in person. Her newest book, A Familiar Stranger, is out on September 27th. Welcome, Alessandra.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so happy to have you. So I realized I should have confirmed that that's how we pronounce your last name.
100%. I always tell everyone it's a pen name, so you really can't butcher it. Yes.
I appreciate that, but I was like, oh, yes. Do you pronounce the E, Torre? Is that how you say it?
I say it I say it Torre. Sometimes I say Tori, like Joe Torre. I've gotten everything. When I went to an Italian signing, they pronounced it probably the correct way, which I don't even remember. So right. Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that, because butchering somebody's name seems like sort of the top of faux pas, especially for a podcast interview. So there you go. My noviceness at this shows. So first of all, this was super fun read. Your books are always like, okay, stay up late. We're gonna have to finish this before we get any sleep tonight. So tell our listeners about A Familiar Stranger.
So A Familiar Stranger is a domestic suspense. It's the basic elevator pitch of the book is it's about a woman who lives a double life, and one of the men in her life is pretty much all of the men in her life are keeping secrets. So it's how sort of her two lives end up colliding and the aftermath of that. So that's my two-second spiel of the book. It's a domestic / psychological suspense. Mm-hmm. I never really know what falls under psychological suspense, but it's set in California. Almost all of my AR stories are set in California. So it's but this is not as a lot of them are very like glamorous. This is more of a domestic suspense kind of.
Yeah.
So
this is a mother sort of in a rut, which of course, we can totally appreciate, because that happens. So where did the seed for this idea? Because we're not going to talk about it, but there's quite a big twist here in this book, an unexpected, an unusual twist. So tell us, without telling us,
without telling us everything.
Right. Where did the story idea come from?
Well, I watched a presentation once about id lists. Like you have your things that you just love as a writer. And so for me, double lives is always something that I've always loved. I've never really written a full double life. So the original thought going into this is like, oh, I'm going to have a woman who has, a double life. And the first pitch that I did to the publisher was like, my first what the publisher bought was a story that started at a fancy dinner party. Everybody's dead, and you have this woman who's been flying across the country living these two lives, and she's like the only surviving person. That's what they bought. This book is not anything. And there was like,
I don't really remember a fancy dinner party.
Yeah, there was organ harvesting involved.
Wow.
There is none of that. That's what they paid for. That's what they said. Yes, sounds good. Here's my full outline. And I sat down and I wrote a book that has absolutely nothing to do with that.
Yeah. So tell people about that, because I think this happens to everybody. I think most writers, right, what we pitch to our editor, what they buy is sort of an idea that's not really fully formed, because you can't really create the book until you write the book. So so tell us about, like, if that's how you normally work, you do sample chapters, or what do you submit to? You're Thomas and Mercer, right? So
Yeah,
who's
this is Thomas and Mercer. So my very first book with them, I was selling them a finished manuscript. Like I had a finished
yes,
manuscript, they bought it. So they knew
which
what they were
is
doing.
that's usually how it works with your
And
first
that's
book, right?
normally,
Yeah,
yeah. And then once they're like, okay, this person is legit, you know, so with my next ones, I mean, it had been a multi-book deal. So so they knew like I was going to have to write a different book. So with my second book with them, so the first book was Every Last Secret. The second book was The Good Lie. And I submitted lots and lots of ideas. They didn't like any of the ideas. And finally we settled on an idea that they liked. And I liked, and I sat down and I wrote a completely different book. Like her job was the same. That was the only thing that was the same. But thankfully they liked it. So I think when A Familiar Stranger came around, which that's never the title I know it as. I think this book was always a double life for me, is what it was called. But when I submitted this, by the time this book came around, I think they were kind of used to me not delivering what I promised,
and all the same book. Yeah.
And today is my deadline for my fourth book with them. And it also is not. So thankfully in this book, so what Danielle alluded to was that there's a twist in this book, and it's fairly unconventional. And when my first draft of this book, I hated it. I just hated it. I threw it away, actually. And so I reached out to, and I was working with an private editor at the time, and I was trying to figure out what to do with and she brought up an idea, and I was like, can I do that? Like, I don't. So then I called my agent, and I was like, A Familiar Stranger, we were calling it something else, but Familiar Stranger, I was like, this is what I want to do with it. And she had the same, she's like, I'm not sure that's been done in a book before. She's like, let me think about this for a minute. So I was like, I'm wondering if I should call Amazon and run this by them before I write like this entire rest of the book. And so we decided not to tell Amazon. We decided
okay, that's your editor. So she's saying, we decided not to tell the publisher that we were going to do this very unconventional thing. No, right. I love the.
This is my private editor. This isn't my Amazon editor. This is my someone I'm paying directly. So we're like, we're not sure that they're going to be on board. So let's just write it, and then we'll see if they like it. Because I was certain that maybe I could sell them on it with the story, but not sell them on it with the idea. So so I went down that path, and I will tell any readers that are listening, I think half of my readers are not going to like this book. But most of my readers are romance readers. So they're used to a certain storyline, right? Or they're used to a different. So I think my romance readers, and I've been watching the reviews on Goodreads very carefully, and everyone's great on Goodreads. No one's spoiled the plot twist, which is fantastic. But they either love the twist or they hate the twist.
Right.
So it's going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to this book releasing, because I'll be curious to see. But I think it'll be a very divided audience.
Yeah, which is actually
love or hate Verity.
Which is fun, right? Because which is fun because I think it gets people talking about the book, and it's fair. I mean, it is. I enjoyed it, but it was very unexpected. And for somebody who, like me, right? I've read, 50 thrillers this year, and I have not in my, that I can think of, seen this twist. So that's super fun, and I think people like something new. Of course, some are gonna complain that it isn't. It doesn't have it's not a very romantic story. Let's just put it that way.
It's not romantic at all. Not a lot of my AR stories aren't romantic, but it's not a romance. It is a suspense. And so I think maybe some of my romance readers might get lulled in, because it's like, oh, an affair,
right?
An affair, like maybe this is going to be. So if you are a thriller author who hates romance, which that was me for like 90% of my life, I was like, ew, romance, I hate that. You'll be fine with this.
Yes.
but it'll be interesting. It'll be really, I'm excited for release. It releases the 27th of September.
Yes.
But I'm
It's
also definitely a little nervous. So, and it was funny. So we submitted it to Amazon and I was sitting there, for like 5 days until I got their feedback. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's going to be? They never said a word about it. Like they never were like, I don't know. It's like, they just sent me back an editorial letter. Like it was no big deal. Like I hadn't just dropped this.
That is so funny. Right.
So it's like, okay, I guess we're fine.
They think it's going to work, which is awesome because they oftentimes know what they're doing. Well, it's funny because, my third book was called Familiar Stranger in my mind.
Yeah.
And it was released as Ruthless Game. So it's kind of funny. Like I saw this and I was like, oh my God, I had a book called this, but of course not really. So like you said, we don't always get control of the titles, right? That doesn't happen. So you've written like more than 20 books. So
yeah, I think I'm approaching 30. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay. That's so impressive. So tell us like, how do the ideas normally sort of, what happens to seed a new idea?
Yeah. So ideas, one of the first books I ever read, and if you're ever a reader interested in becoming an author, or if you're an author, or if you're just a reader who just loves to read different things, Stephen King wrote a book on writing, which is my favorite book of all time.
Yeah.
And it was when I decided I was going to try to write a book, my mom sent me a stack of paperbacks, all nonfiction books about writing books. And the first 3, like I just didn't get past the second or third chapter. Like I was overwhelmed. I already felt like an idiot, like it wasn't. And then I got to On Writing. And that book is the book that convinced me that I could write a book. Like it was, it's a fantastic read. And it's super interesting. Even if you have no interest in writing, like it's still really interesting read. But one of the things he said at the beginning is like ideas are everywhere. He's like, you really just have to kind of teach your mind how to listen out for them. And it's so true. Like it took me a little bit of understanding. Like it wasn't like, oh, I closed that chapter and I ran out and I had like 50 ideas, but ideas do really come from everywhere. So it's just interesting where sometimes I'll watch like a trailer for a movie and I'll be like, oh, and I think I know like where this movie is going. And then we watch the movie and it goes in a completely different direction. But I'm like, that idea that I thought it was, like, I was really interested in watching that movie. There's a different idea, like to write that book. And real life, Every Last Secret was inspired by a real life, scenario that my friend was going through. So there's just a lot of times something in real life will trigger. A Familiar Stranger, the character is an obituary writer. And that was not like the initial thought, but it was one of those things like sometimes somewhere I met an obituary writer and it was like, oh, you know what? Like that'd be a cool job. I'm going to stick that aside.
Right.
And at some point somewhere. So I have like a big book. It's a file on my computer, but I have a big file of all of the ideas that I've ever had. And whenever I am writing, normally you get your best idea, like this brilliant, groundbreaking idea normally comes like when you're in the middle of a book. And so I'll just write a chapter or two and then I stick it in this file and I forget about it until it's time for my next book. And then I sit down, and that's my favorite thing, is to go through all the ideas and see like what's there and what I could.
I love that. So you actually don't just write down the idea, you sort of get into the character and let a little of it fly, so that when you're starting a book, you're like, you actually have a little start.
Yeah, I write enough to kind of get it out of my system a little bit, because I'm like, oh, I can see this character and kind of feel the feel of the book. And other times I don't have that feel, like it's just like like I should write about, mass murdering nanny or something, and so I'll just write that down.
Right.
Nobody steal that idea.
Right. It's yours. It's in your file. A mass murdering nanny. Got it.
But I'll just write down like that.
Right.
And one of the funniest stories is like I started keeping a notepad beside my bed, because I would wake up with these, like, I would have a dream and I wake up and I'd be like, oh my gosh, this would be a great book. And I'd be like, no way I'm going to forget this, right? Like, this is the next Pulitzer Prize winning book. And of course, in the morning, like, I have no idea what that idea was. So I started keeping a notepad by my bed, and I woke up one night, brilliant idea, like, oh my gosh. so I'm like, I have my notepad. So I wrote down like a few sentences, enough to like cement it, and I went back to bed. And as soon as I woke up in the morning, I was like, I had the best idea last night. Like, I can't remember what it was, but let me go look like in my piece of paper. And on my piece of paper, I had, and it's been at least 5 years, so I'm going to try to go off the best of my memory. But it said like, John and Henry, go on a trip to, to find something or whatever. And then I wrote, John is a dog. And I underlined it like 5 times. Like, that was the missing key that would solve every literary problem out there. Like, I was so excited by the fact that John was a dog. I'm like, this
what is brilliant in the middle of the night, right?
Yeah.
Isn't always brilliant in the light of day, is what you're saying. It is. I do that. I do keep a notepad also by my bed, and I sometimes wake up in the morning and it's like all the lines are squished together. So it's really hard to even tell what I was writing. But I do think there's something really brilliant to that, because there's that moment of, subconscious, right? That's sort of where your subconscious is really alert.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, if you have like, I don't know about you, but if you have a plot problem, it's oftentimes like I think about it before bed, right?
Yeah.
Like solve it while I'm asleep.
I do that all the time. Like, I'll go to bed thinking about, I kind of fall into the story, right? And I'm like thinking about what I'm going to write. And a lot of times I can solve whatever it is. Like, I can figure it out, or just sleeping on it helps.
Yes, exactly. I think that's 100% right. So, so Lillian is a particular. I know she wasn't probably the Lillian of the original book, who sounded like more glamorous and living two separate lives. But she really rings true for me, and maybe it's because she's both of the men in her life. If you have a son, and a husband, I have a daughter as well. But the men can be a little bit, what's the word? They can be less than, taking care of us.
Disconnected. Yeah.
They can be disconnected, right? So did she come from a certain place? You have kids, right? Are they at this age?
So I have a teenage son. He's 19. Yeah. I think her son's like 17.
Right.
And I have a husband, obviously. I mean, not obviously, a lot of people don't have husbands, but I have a husband. Her husband's character, I don't want to give away too much, but
right.
I was watching a certain TV show at the time. So, and a lot of people will recognize that when they kind of get into understanding the characters. So like her husband's job, I definitely pulled from that TV show. But her husband is very, like disconnected, which I can, which there have definitely been times in my life where I've been disconnected, or
right.
So that was easy to write, kind of and she's kind of frustrated with just kind of feeling lost, I guess. And at the beginning of the book, she loses her job. So it's suddenly like, she's just trying to kind of figure out like her identity, and,
right.
And she doesn't feel like she can kind of communicate with her husband about this. So it's her just kind of, and while she's there is kind of when she kind of falls into like this other life. And the other interesting thing about Lillian, who's the main character, is because she's an obituary writer, she kind of gets these snapshots into different people's lives, and
right.
Where they, the age in which they die and things like that. So she has seen women who have had much more exciting lives, or
right.
have done so much more. And so it's kind of, there's this like, God, like, why, like, am I really living my life? And so that's kind of where this, other life comes from.
Right.
And she just kind of is given, falls into a scenario where it's able to happen.
Right. And I think that part of it, and not to say that we're not happily married and that our children aren't amazing, because of course that's a given, but it is like, it's every sort of her age, like we all sort of just, there's this point, where we're like, what are we doing? And as our children become more independent, 17 is certainly that, it becomes a little more pressing, like, wait a minute, because they're such a big part of your life, and so much sort of purpose for so long. So anyway, I think that's the thing about
there's always, not always, but I'm sure a lot of women have times where they feel like it's like, am I just like your made and like, I mean, like, I'm like, what, like, who is doing anything for me? Like, right. Like, I'm picking up after you guys and, and handling all of your crap and cooking, and like, what is like,
I think that's right. I think, yes.
It's people are going to start catering to me.
Right.
This is really great, this setup that y'all have here.
Yeah.
It's not,
it's not great for you,
really
but it's really great for them.
right. Right.
It's so true. It's so true. So, okay. So do you have, it sounds like you create an outline often for these stories, but then do you write the outline and then just toss it out the window? Because it sounds like you're sort of, well, are you a pantser?
I'm not an outliner. That's the big thing. If I outline a book, I'm done with it. Like, I know everything's happened. I'm bored.
Right.
So sometimes and with this publisher, I don't submit I submit like a 1-page list of bullet points, kind of, this is what's happened. And they know that I don't really know, but I think they at least think that they're getting something like this.
Right.
So like with the book that I'm turning in today, I'm turning in like second or third edits on it. I actually did write the first draft to the outline, or to the summary that I had sent them, but I hated it. Like, it was way too romancy, and my editors kind of likes romance, so I knew she'd be happy with it. But I was like, this is just, I don't like this. I don't like anything about it. So I emailed them and I said, like, I can still make this deadline, but to be honest, I'm just going to junk this, and I need to go like in a different direction. So I think they kind of knew, like, okay, like, we aren't sure what we're getting, but it's probably not going to be what we think we're getting.
Right.
So normally I just sit down with the character in mind and a rough idea of what I think is going to happen. And then I just start writing. And sometimes it goes in that direction that I think it's going to happen. And sometimes it doesn't. And I never know. It's very stressful.
Yes, I know. Right. I'm a pantser too. I mean, in the same sort of way, like, I usually know like the culminating scene, but I think there's something that you said that I actually think rings really true for me too, and not for everybody. But a lot of authors I've spoken to is that it sort of takes the magic. There's a little magic that gets us to really invest in a story for however many months it takes to write a book, right? And if you sort of know, then the magic is sort of gone.
Yeah, there's that whole discovery thing, I mean, it's like, my husband loves to gamble because there's that moment before the card flips over where it's like I don't know what's happening, like, and it's anticipation. And I feel that way when I'm writing a new chapter, like anything could happen in this chapter, versus like if you're playing a card game and you already know that that's going to be a 2 of diamonds, like, you already know I'm about to be happy or I'm about to be upset, and so I think so I love that mystery, and I can still get there if I have a very rough outline, because I still don't know the pieces, and I know that this guy's going to end up being bad, but I don't know how. And I did kind of know, like with A Familiar Stranger, I knew who the villain was going to be from the beginning, and so that that made it easier. I just didn't know, how certain people were going to die, and I didn't know how I was going to unveil everything to the reader. So I still had plenty of room to play around and go astray. So do
you feel like you're kind of dealing with, like, you're putting a character in sort of a high pressure situation and then following them as they sort of try to figure out what to do? Is it the character that leads the story for you?
Yeah, typically normally it's the character that leads the story. But like with A Familiar Stranger, I really struggled because for at least the first 25% of the book, I didn't like, Lillian was not clear in my head. And if you're ever an author and you're really struggling, a lot of times it's because you don't know that character, right? So every interaction, every conversation they have with someone, every time they're getting ready in the morning, like, is this an OCD person? Is this someone who's making their bed? Is this someone who's like lollygagging around? Or is this someone who's going for a run and has everything done in their life before like 8 a.m.? So I just couldn't figure her out. And at the time I didn't have her job. So once I figured out her job, then she kind of clicked into place. And then I just needed to start kind of putting her together. And once I did that, then the rest of the story really came out of me, because this was a book where I knew kind of what I wanted, like a woman in a double life, and that this and this was going to happen. But I just couldn't, she just wasn't clear in my head. It was funny, like the other cast of characters were very clear in my head.
Right.
But
Right.
most important character, I couldn't picture her.
So how to resolve that? Do you write about, like, what's your sort of, do you interview her? Are you somebody who, what do you do?
I don't interview, but I do find a muse. And normally my muse is like, okay, she's going to look like Kate Hudson, but she's going to have the personality of Angelina Jolie or something like
Okay.
that. So normally
Right.
I have like a looks muse, and I'll have like a personality muse. And oftentimes the personality muse, it's not always a famous person. Often it's like my Aunt Wendy
Right.
or
Right.
whatever. And sometimes the character and personality, sometimes it's like, it's Drew Barrymore, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like a
Yeah.
very distinct personality, very distinct character. But I also like, so it's Drew Barrymore, but she wants to kill people. Like,
Right.
like
She
that's,
did. I feel like she did that in the show once, didn't she?
did she?
But
Yeah.
I don't know. But I love that. So it's like, what would Drew do? The whole thing
Right.
is like, every scene is like, what would Drew do? That's an interesting way to do it. And you feel like those, well, particularly like Angelina Jolie and Drew Barrymore, those bring to mind very different
Yeah.
personalities, right?
Very.
So in that way, I can see how that would be helpful. So you also have a school, Torre Inc. Tell us about that. What brought you to teaching students, and what does your school look like, and all that good stuff? Because that's, I mean, as an, for aspiring authors, to have a place to start. We didn't have that. So that's really helpful.
And that's really where it started, is I didn't have a place to start. Like when I started in 2012, like I had that Stephen King book that spoke to me, and that was kind of it. I started in 2012. It was a very different time there, both like having a book that was successful was much easier, but there were no resources. Like I remember hiring a local PR company to do a press release. Like I
Right.
might as well have just lit a bunch of money on fire. Like it wasn't like, I just didn't know. There was no guidance. Like I remember reading a review and someone's like, this book needs to be edited. And I was like, edited. Okay. How do I do that? Like,
Right.
who do I find? I remember getting my first editorial letter from a publisher and having absolutely no idea how. I agree. These are all problems. I have no idea how to fix any of these things, right? Like
Right.
I don't
Right.
even know where to start. Like, so it was kind of one of those things where it was like, for a long time, I told myself, once I like figure this out, like there needs to be resources for someone. So I started Alessandra Torre Inc. in, I want to say 2016. And now there are a ton of courses and there's a ton of options. But at the beginning, there really wasn't much out there at all when I started that. And it's not so much a school as a community. We have a Facebook group that has, I don't know, 20,000 authors. And then, and I initially started teaching classes in writing, marketing, and publishing. I still have those classes. They're very much like writing for dummies, publishing for dummies, marketing for dummies. I can't use those words, but that's basically what they are. It's like, I don't want this like highbrow craft thing. I want something that like a normal person is like, okay, I can do this. This is how to do it. Right. They are very beginner, my classes. And so quickly I realized like, okay, I've exhausted my well of knowledge. I want to learn from all of the smartest people doing all of the things right now. And so that was kind of where Inkers Con came from, which was like, let me find all of the best people in the best areas, and the areas that really would affect someone's career and bottom line and success. And originally I was going to bring them all together and film some videos for like an online summit. But then it was one of these things, well, it's like, well, if we're getting all of these experts together, we might as well let authors be there too. So then suddenly, without us intending to, it became a conference. And now it's grown into one of the biggest biggest digital authors conferences in the world. We have thousands of attendees. So we do an in-person conference in Dallas. We record everything professionally with our team of videographers. And then we launched the digital audience, which is worldwide. And we do we do a lot of live events with that launch, but then anyone can right now visit inkerscon.com and unlock all of that conference access for this year. So it's been great for me because it forces me to learn every year, and that is something for a long time. I mean, I didn't take a craft class until I was like probably 10 books in, I mean, I was learning by fire. And so the more I've learned, the easier everything is,
Right.
And the more things I've been able to cross off my plate, which is actually the really best thing about it.
Explain what you mean.
Like, there was a time where I was like obsessed with like having my books in bookstores. And then I took a class last year at Inkers Con about how to get your books into bookstores. And I realized it's a financial commitment. Like if Target calls me and says, we want to put your book in all of our stores and we want 30,000 copies. And I'm like, great. And it's like, and just as an FYI, we'll be returning back any copies we don't sell. So they're going to buy 30,000, but I have to be financially prepared that if they send back 15,000, that I can pay for those 15,000, so that's not like, it, and it's like this whole big, long process. Like a lot of indies are like, gosh, they're not putting our books in stores. Well, we're also not having the book final and finished 7 months prior to release, where they can, we're not doing all of these steps that need to be done in order for it to happen. And so once I learned that process, it was like, okay, I don't care about it that much. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like which was a relief. Like, it was like, okay,
right.
Like I can cross that off my list and I can reinvest those energies in something else. And so that's what the last few years have been about, me figuring out kind of what really translates into money and sales and audience. And what doesn't, and me saying, okay, I'm only going to focus on these 2 or 3 things. Right now, 90% of my author time is writing. And that's exactly how I want it to be. Like where for a long time in my career, it was 50-50. Like if, or even 30% was writing and the rest was marketing, doing all of the things.
There's so much, right?
Yeah.
And how many books you must be writing? I mean, the math obviously dictates that you're writing more than 1 book a year. So how many books a year are you writing?
Well, actually, right now I am down to 1 to 2 books a year. Normally, my best was 4 books a year, and that was even when I was only doing 50-50. With all of the other stuff, with all of the marketing and other stuff. But right now it's Binge Books, which is, kind of a reader collective startup that we're working on. And that takes up half of my time. And then Inkers Con takes up a big chunk of my time. So I only have about 10 hours a week right now that I can spend on my books, on writing and my author career versus the other items.
So, so this brings me to sort of another question, which I think is interesting for people, because lots of people who are aspiring to write books are not doing it full time, because of course you don't make enough money in the beginning, or even oftentimes ever. To be lucky enough, like we are, to write full time, whatever that means.
Right.
So as you structure your life, do you have, do you say, I'm getting my words, like Wednesdays are for writing, or how do you structure, the business versus the creative?
I am the worst person ever. I mean, I'm really a bad person to ask about that. So many times I've said, like, you don't know how many times I've sat down with my family and been like, okay, from 7 to 9 is my writing time. Do not interrupt me. Do not come in. Do not whatever. I've tried everything. I unplugged the internet so that I won't get distracted. I've tried all sorts of things. I've said, okay, I'm only going to write 2 days a week, but I'm going to do it for 4 or 5 hour stretches, and it's just, it just doesn't work. I just can't, there's too many things on me right now. I'm really burning the candle at both ends right now. And it's not a pace I can maintain. Like I'm going, like I have to figure it out. So I'm really bad person to ask about that, because I'm like, I was up till 3 this morning working on my edits, my book's due tonight. So I'll be up. Last time I submitted at 4:30 in the morning. I think that counts as making the deadline, right? Like,
yes, I think it's before they get up, right?
Yeah, before they get up. That's my thought. Yeah,
they're in Seattle, so it's
that's even better, right? Like
3 hours earlier, right?
I almost made it by midnight. Yeah. So I'm horrible about that right now.
Yeah.
It's just I write when I can, and normally it's a deadline. But I also learned, Becca Smine teaches a bunch of classes, like in for authors and mindset and that sort of things, and different personality types. And I have learned that I need a deadline like that. I need that pressure, because if it's just like, oh, deliver the book whenever. And it's so funny because so many times publishers giving me an extra 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And I'm like, that's so much time. Like, I don't need all that. That's amazing. I'll have plenty of time. And I'm still down.
Right.
I then don't
just
touch it for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I drive myself crazy.
Well, that's good to hear too, because I do feel like also there's this sense, in the world that the author's life is so glamorous. We wake up at 10 and write for a couple of hours, and then have a coffee, and then right. And I certainly don't get going first thing in the morning. I'm not one of those like crack of dawn people, but it's sort of always a grind, right? You're always, and everything else seems more urgent than that book, because usually, if somebody's calling on the phone, your characters aren't calling you and saying, when are you going to get back to me? So it does seem more urgent. Okay. So you mentioned binge books, but tell us a little bit about that.
So Binge Books is a site for readers where it's a book discovery site. So it's similar to Goodreads. It doesn't sell books to readers. It just helps them find a book, and then they can click through to their favorite retailer. And so it's just a nice, clean. We just launched the Binge Books app, so you can. The app is really, really great. I love the app, and it's so fast. But what's exciting about Binge Books is what's coming in the next. I say the next few months. We never know with our timelines, but soon we'll be able to offer book recommendations on Binge Books that I think are really going to blow a lot of readers away. And so we have been developing an AI technology that is doing really cool things in terms of book recommendations and helping readers to find a book that's similar to books that they've read. So if you haven't already joined Binge Books, either as an author or a reader, I encourage you to check out bingebooks.com and just stay tuned, because we've got some exciting.
There's already some, do you want to mention Marlo, or is that, tell us about Marlo, because I've used Marlo. I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, so Marlo is the name of our technology. She is very much like a team member. We refer to her as if she's a person. I think my husband thought Marlo was a person for a long time, the way I talk about her. But she's our artificial intelligence. So currently, she is obsessed with books. She can read a book in a period of a minute. And she remembers every scene and every character and every plot point in that book. So she has read thousands of books, hundreds of thousands of books. And she is trained on bestsellers. So she can tell a good book from a bad book. She can tell a potential bestseller from a normal book. So that technology can be used in really cool ways. Right now, we're using it with authors. They can submit a manuscript to Marlo. I submit all of my first, second, third, fourth drafts to her, and then she gives feedback. She has this big report that she sends, and it's just about looking at your book in a different way, and kind of pointing out different things about your book, but also comparing your book in terms of plot line and pacing and things like that to her bestseller, library.
Interesting.
So that's what's cool about an AI that knows every single thing about every single book. Is she's like a super librarian.
Right.
So that when we bring her over to Binge Books, it's like, if you've ever walked into a bookstore and go, oh my God, I loved Gone Girl. Like, what's a book like Gone Girl? You're really restricted to that librarian's knowledge of what they've read recently or ever, or what the publisher is telling them. These books are like Gone Girl. If the Simon & Schuster lawsuit, if anyone's watching that, has taught us anything, it's that publishers have no idea what they're doing in terms, and it's a guessing game. I mean, it's a guessing game. But so much of publishers don't know their backlists. And if you had to ask a publisher, what book do you have that's most similar to Gone Girl? Like,
they'd be guessing.
They're going to take a guess.
Yes. And that is real. And actually, it's so interesting to have your book quantified. One of the things I think is so strange is like when she comes up with like numbers and, just about like where the beats hit, and you think that's so bizarre to look at your book in terms of something that isn't sort of an emotional, subjective reaction. So I like that about her, because I'm sort of an objective, and I came from finance, and I have a lot of quantitative background. So it always makes me feel kind of good when she's like, these are sort of you're like, this is your report. It feels so like, so refreshing, because every time, you get feedback on your book, it's like, well, I sort of felt like, and you're like, that's not that helpful. So
Yeah.
I have a book that I'm just finishing, that I'm getting close to submitting. So I'm fingers crossed that,
Yeah.
about that. But anyway, that is super cool. And obviously I'm a binge books author, and you guys are doing an amazing job. I can't even imagine how much work that is, because it seems it's a lot. So I can see why you're like trying to figure out how to write. So okay, so you just submitted a new book. So what's next? Can you tell us anything about this?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about it. It's called what is it? It's called A Fatal Affair, or The Fatal Affair. I'm pretty sure it's called A Fatal Affair. Danielle knows we don't come up with these titles. I submit a list of fantastic ideas, and then they send me a list of their ideas.
Yeah.
And so, but I actually like this title a lot. It fits really well. And the gist of this book is, I just totally blank. I have been doing nothing but editing this book, and I was just like, what is this book about? But it's
You're in the
about,
weeds with it. I get it.
yeah, it's my other favorite thing is twins. And I've never written a book with twins before. But the gist of this book is it's about two Hollywood celebrities that are twins, and one of them is a serial killer. So it's kind of diving into that. So I'm back in the world of Beverly Hills,
yes,
and which is the other thing that I really love to write about is kind of that celebrity world. So I'm and the woman who's in love with them both. That's the with both of those.
And you're but you're in Florida, right? So do you get to go out and you just say, I have to go to Beverly Hills and do some research?
Well, I've definitely written off a lot of trips to Beverly Hills, and
Fair.
I've been to California in so long. I don't think I've been there in probably 5 years.
Right.
I'm there maybe twice a year. And it's I love I don't know if it's because I'm an author and because I'm going out there for meetings but there is this energy kind of like in LA and in Hollywood and in Beverly Hills, which is like that there's this energy like something's going to happen, but it's also very hard for me because it feels like everything is happening for all of these people, and everybody you talk to is in the industry, like
right,
theater, and they're like they also are a gaffer on a movie, and you're driving down a street and they're filming a movie, and
right.
leave our hotel, they were filming a TV show. So it feels like so many things are happening that you aren't a part of,
Right,
and
right.
so I don't think I could live in Los Angeles because I think that would really demoralize me. Like I love to come there and have a meeting with my film agent and feel like something's happening. But Hollywood's also really great about telling you like, oh, like, success is just around the corner and we can do all of these amazing things for you.
Right.
And then, like it all falls apart eventually.
Right. It's such a shot in the dark. I know if you've had movies optioned, you like think for 10 seconds, oh my God, this is a thing. And then,
I don't even get excited about movie options anymore. I don't share options with readers because so many times like we've had a script written and then we've had a studio attached and I've had a production company and then something happens,
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
It is very, it's a very, thank God that's not how we're making, paying our mortgages, right? That would be very, very stressful.
Exactly.
So
I can't even imagine if I was working in Hollywood. I did have one movie made, Hollywood Dirt was made.
that's awesome.
But it was for a streaming service, so it was a little bit different. It wasn't a big budget, but it was still.
But now the streaming services are sort of they are. They're really
very
cool.
Over. Yeah, it's so much.
They really are.
10 years. I remember when we pitched Girl in 6C, which is like an erotic thriller, the only options were HBO or Showtime. Like that was it, because no one else would touch that like sexual content. Now it's like as soon as Stars came out, Black Sails, I'm like, whoa, okay, I guess like we can add Stars. And then it was like now it's like you're seeing crazy content all over the place. So
it does it does feel sort of encouraging for authors. Also, we're seeing a lot of our colleagues, our friends and colleagues put stuff out there. So that seems encouraging, but until Yeah, until it's like they're filming the pilot or they've finished filming the
Yeah.
pilot, I think you just keep it to yourself. Well, this was so exciting. So tell everybody what's the best place to find you. I know you're kind of you're all over, you're on Facebook and Instagram, and so where should they go to get, how about your website to get a list of all
Yeah.
of your stuff?
The best place is alessandratorre.com. I picked the worst pen name because Alessandra can be spelled 4 different ways, but it's I just stuttered. It's ALESS. I'm looking at a book. Yeah, ALESS Sandra. And I would suggest signing up for my newsletter there, which you can also do at nextnovel.com, like so nextnovel.com. Because I am hoping, when I've been looking at everything and trying to figure out, I'm thinking about really just pulling out of social media, and just communicating with my readers through my newsletter. So if you're interested, check out nextnovel.com and you can sign up for my newsletter there.
That's fantastic. Well, I get that the social media game is exhausting.
It's
So
exhausting.
it's exhausting, and I don't know. I mean, I think yeah, that's a whole different that's for the next conversation, right? Well, listen, Alessandra, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the Killer Women podcast with A.R. Torre and her new book, A Familiar Stranger, out on the 27th.
7th.
Did I get that right? 27th.
27th.
Okay. It's so exciting. So I can't wait to hear what people think of that twist. So thank you so much for joining us, and everybody for joining Killer Women. And until next time, we will see you later. Bye.
Bye, guys.